is now 6:30. I call the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission regular meeting, September 24, 2019 to order. Number one item on the agenda is roll call. Let the record show that Commissioners Bates and McFeeters are absent this evening. Also, for the record, Debbie Schwab has submitted her resignation, and we're in the process of coming up with another commissioner. Item 2, approval of the minutes, August 27. Do I have a motion?
Make the motion to approve the August 27, 2019 regular business meeting.
I second it.
Motion and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes. Item 3, as with all of our meetings, public comment. We welcome and accept public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of the Planning Commission meeting. Have a large audience. Is anyone wanting to speak to anything other than tonight's agenda? Seeing none, I close that part of the meeting. Item 4, before we get into it, I would like to entertain a motion to table and move items C and D to the October 22nd Planning Commission meeting. Steve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As you know, we've been working closely with Main Street on the revisions to the design guidelines. We got communication today from their executive director, who is new in the position, that they'd like just a little more time to study them before we conduct a hearing. And since we're a joint project, we certainly support that continuance request. Secondly, the item number D is really a work in progress for staff, and that we have nothing more to say than what we had in the staff report. So what we would suggest is that you continue, as opposed to table, please continue items C and D to your October Planning Commission meeting.
Okay.
And it'd be appropriate to have a motion and second and a vote.
Do I have a motion?
I move that we continue items C and D from the agenda to the October 22nd, 2019 regular business meeting.
I second the motion.
Okay, a motion and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Now we come to the public meetings and hearings part of our agenda. The first item is the Village of Gary Oaks preliminary plat. It's a public hearing. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on the preliminary plat. The applicants are proposing to develop 36.7 acres for single-family homes on the southwest corner of SR 20 and Southwest 24th Avenue. The preliminary development plans include 135 lots, a public park, 4 detention basins, wetland restorations, and trail connections. The development plans also include downstream stormwater improvements and intersection improvements at Southwest 24th Avenue and Southwest Eagle Vista Drive. I believe, yes, Steve.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. As you know, this public hearing is a quasi-judicial matter. As such, it is subject to the appearance of fairness doctrine, which means that I have a whole series of questions that I will ask the commission to help you ascertain whether you should sit and hear this application. So, reading from my script, RCW 4236 requires that members of this body determine prior to staff presentation of a quasi-judicial matter whether the appearance of fairness doctrine requires that he, she recuse himself, herself from sitting on the matter. In light of that requirement, I will ask you some questions before we begin the hearing. I will ask you the questions as a group and then call upon each commissioner asking for your response. So question number 1, does any member of this commission have knowledge of or have conducted business with either the proponents or the opponents of this application? Mr. Phillips?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
Mr. Hovey?
No.
Question number 2, does any member of this commission either have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in the outcome of this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
Mr. Hovey?
No.
Number 3, does any member of this commission know whether or not their employer has a financial interest in the property or area which will be impacted by the decision in this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
Mr. Hovey?
No.
All right. Question number 4. Does any member of this commission live or own property within 300 feet of the area which will be impacted by the decision in this proceeding? Mr. Phillip,
No.
Mr. Freeman,
No.
Mr. Wassinger,
No.
and Mr. Hovey.
No.
Number 5, does any member of this commission have any special knowledge about the substance or merits of this proceeding which would or could cause the commission member to prejudge the outcome of this proceeding? Mr. Phillip,
No.
Mr. Freeman,
No.
Mr. Wassinger,
No.
Mr. Hovey.
No.
Number 6, is there any member of this commission who believes that he cannot sit and hear this matter fairly and impartially, both as to the respective positions of the proponents and the opponents in this proceeding? Mr. Phillip,
No.
Mr. Freeman, Mr. Wassinger,
No.
Mr. Hovey.
No.
Number 7, has any commission member had ex parte contacts concerning this matter? Mr. Phillip,
No.
Mr. Freeman,
No.
Mr. Wassinger,
No.
Mr. Hovey.
No.
All right, then question number 8, is there any member of the audience who, because of the appearance of fairness doctrine, wishes to disqualify any member of the commission from hearing this matter? If so, please state the commission member and the reasons why you believe that the commission member should be disqualified. Seeing none, I think we can move on, Mr. Wassinger.
Okay, very good. This is a public hearing for the Village of Gary Oaks application. Members of the audience will be given an opportunity to speak to the matter. A maximum of 3 minutes per public speaker will be allowed, provided that the commission may, in its discretion, allow for additional time where the complexity of the issues involved requires more time in order to give the public speaker a reasonable opportunity to be heard on the matter. No speaker shall be allowed to cede his or her time to another speaker. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Kat Kamak will make the presentation. Kat, good evening.
Thank you. Kat Kamak, Senior Planner, here to present the plat for the Village of Gary Oaks. So most of the information, detailed descriptions of the project, including the drawing sets, have been provided to the commission. What I will do is summarize the design of the plat and highlight some of the issues that have led to all the conditions on the plat. So, as you all know, this is a Type 4 review process, and with the proceedings that you just had before the public hearing, it's an open record public hearing before the Planning Commission, and then you make a recommendation to the City Council. They review it in a closed record review before they make their decision. So this is the location of the development. As you can see, this is just clips actually from the applicant's submittal. So I just cut PDF documents for this presentation. The property is located on the south end of town. This is State Highway 20, and this is 24th Avenue, and it's to the southwest corner. The property is zoned R1. It's approximately 36.69 acres. There's 5 existing lots. They're proposing to subdivide it into 135 lots. It averages to about 3.68 lots per acre, and you have the breakdown of the average lot size and the largest and the smallest lot. So this is an aerial photograph that shows kind of the vicinity of the project. This is to just get everybody oriented. This is the highway, this is 24th, and the red line shows the outline of the acreage that's under proposal. So this is kind of a drawing that shows some of the existing conditions surrounding the plat, and you can see there's 2 existing wetlands. They're man-made, but yet they're categorized as wetlands on the property. There's some existing structures that will be removed as part of this development. Surrounding properties, we have Eagle Vista Drive, and we have, I forget the name of the street there, but that one, and then the Ridgeway Drive is also Vista Park. Thank you. So this is the proposal that is in front of the commission. As to orient yourself, this is Highway 20, 24th. So the proposal is for the 135 lots. What you can see primarily that we would be concerned with is the extension of Eagle Vista Drive. As you can see, they've extended that. They've extended Vista Park. And then you have internal streets that serve the property along with extensions to neighboring properties so that when they develop, they can connect to the street system. The two wetlands are preserved. They have done a wetland study. They've determined what kind of wetlands they are, and they've provided the adequate buffers for it. And they are proposing, as part of their subdivision, 4 detention basins that will serve this property. And primarily, there's a detention basin over here. There's one over there. There's one over there. All of this property on the east side slopes towards the southeast corner. There's a ridge line somewhere here that breaks the water going this way. There's a detention pond to catch most of the stormwater there, which then eventually flows into a ditch that's to the south, and eventually they all flow to the east. As you can see, some of the blocks that are provided here as part of the design, some of our design guidelines or residential subdivision standards require smaller blocks and gridded streets. This is a recent change to move away from the cul-de-sac system and to provide alternate modes of transportation so all the streets are connected. One of those requirements is when you have a very long block, you want to have pedestrian amenities to cut through the blocks, and so they have provided those. And I'll show you a little more detail on where they have provided those mid-block crosswalks and created an internal connection system for pedestrians and bikes. This is kind of an enlargement to show some of the details of some of what they're providing. You can see the lot layout and some of the driveway locations. Some of the important public features that I want to point out to you is an internal connection. There's an existing transit stop right on the highway. They're providing an internal trail connection so that you can kind of access the transit stop from within the subdivision. As mentioned, they're preserving the wetland with the buffer. They're proposing a trail to be located in the wetland buffer, and they also have connections to that trail system. This is the bottom half of that development. You can see the 2 wetlands and the mid-block crosswalk. Eagle Vista Drive will end up being a collector street, and so they have provided the collector cross-section. One of the things that, and I'll go a couple slides back to this aerial photograph. One of the things that the adopted park plan for the city of Oak Harbor proposes to extend a trail system that goes across Eagle Vista, across these properties, eventually connects to Fort Nugent, and eventually goes up north. So all the properties developing along here will have to accommodate for that future trail system, and they have done so with their plans and accommodated a 10-feet multi-use trail along the north side of Eagle Vista. So they're proposing to do the development in 4 phases. The first phase, shown here, will take access off of 24th, develop the properties along with the wetlands and the detention basin, and also along Highway 20, and create that first access, Eagle Vista Drive off of Highway 20. So that is what they're proposing as part of Phase 1. And then they have Phase 2, Phase 3, and Phase 4 from east to west, with the westernmost edge of the property being developed at the very end. What's included in the packet, since this property is adjacent to the highway, they need to have channelization plans done for the highway, turning movements onto 24th and turning movements onto Eagle Vista. This is something that they have to go through a process with the state in order to have approved. These drawings that are included in the packet is to show that they have started that process. This doesn't mean that that's how it'll end up in terms of the final configuration, but that's why we have the list of conditions, in order to kind of bridge the gap between what we have now in terms of information and what will eventually get approved. So during the plat review process, staff uses several sections of the Oak Harbor Municipal Code to review the various design elements that are being proposed to make sure that they are in conformance with all the adopted plans and policies. This is just a list of all the things that we go through between planning and engineering in order to make sure that the development meets the requirements. So the code provides the two plat criteria that are used to review plats, and I've listed them both in the report. I've provided a detailed description of how they meet the criteria. The design that they're proposing generally meets the public health and safety standards that we've set in our code. They provided for open spaces. They're actually providing for a public park in the subdivision. They've got a lot of trail connections, pedestrian walkways for safety and recreation purposes. They've accommodated the 10-foot trail as part of the Parks and Recreation Plan. So they meet all of that public health, safety, and general welfare that the city looks for. Whether the public use and interest will be served by platting of the subdivision dedication, that's a very general statement, but generally if property is within the UGA and it can be served, it is for providing housing for the community. Therefore, they are providing a public benefit by subdividing the plat and creating lots and residential units. So there's a list of conditions that have been included, like I said, to bridge the gaps that are still left between preliminary plat, civil plans, and actually going out there and building the infrastructure. There needs to be a few more things that have to fall into place, but they are working on it, and the conditions of approval is just to make sure that we connect all these dots as we move forward with this proposal. So our recommendations for the Planning Commission, as you're doing right now, is to conduct the public hearing, review the documents, get testimony from the public, and adopt the findings of fact and forward it to the City Council with your recommendation. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Zach?
I'm good right now.
Al?
Chairman, it might be cleaner
Yes,
to take,
that's right, that's
to
right.
hear from the applicant
Yes.
first, and then any
Yes,
members
and
of the
then
public, and then
public,
the
and then-
commission could ask all their questions at one
Absolutely.
time. Thank you.
Thank you. So the applicant.
Members of the Planning Commission, my name is Brad Swanson. Thanks for having us back. We diverted from the normal course and showed up here in June, and told you we'd be back. We'd hoped to be here a little earlier, but as you can see, the project was a bit complex, and we're hearing Mr. Weisinger. You weren't here the first time, so glad to meet you. My name is Brad Swanson. I'm with the Belcher Swanson Law Firm, and I represent the applicant, Gary Oaks LLC. With us tonight are Chris Anderson, applicant's representative, and David Lervik of Lervik Engineering. Mr. Lervik is the project engineer. They were here in June as well. As Mr. Kamick indicates, we've come back for your consideration, but before we kind of get to the nitty-gritty here, I want to thank staff for the hard work it did getting us to this point. This is a complex project, lots of moving parts, and it was truly a team effort with the staff and the applicant to get us here. So thanks for that. Appreciate it a lot, Mr. Powers and Mr. Kamick. Now to the project. Mr. Kamick did a great job of speaking through the issues and giving the commission an idea of really what this project is all about. And frankly, we don't have anything to add, except that we have reviewed the staff report, reviewed the conditions of approval and the findings of fact. The applicant concurs with those materials, agrees with them as written, and asks the commission to move forward with a recommendation of approval to the city council without change. We worked very hard with staff in the last couple months to get to that point, and we're good to go with it as it is proposed now. You have any questions for me or the applicant team at this point?
No. We may call on
Okay,
you
great.
later to.
So if during the public hearing, if there are comments from the public, we would ask that we be able to respond if we need. And then any questions, I'll be sitting right here with Mr. Lervick, and we're ready to help you as we go. Okay?
Okay, Brad, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
So I have a list of folks that want to speak, but I don't know which one they want to speak to. So I could just call for people that might want to come up at this time and give us their 3 minutes on the Village of Gary Oaks. Do I have any takers at this time?
Can I make one comment, just one question?
If you'd like to just step up and state your name, that'd be great.
I actually came to speak about the second, but I have a question. My name is Tim Bergman. I live on Scenic Heights.
Okay.
So I travel from town here up that road, take a
Okay.
left on Scenic Heights, usually after 15, 20 cars. Hopefully,
Is this addressing Gary Oaks now?
yes, it is. My
Okay.
question is,
Excuse
what
me,
are the
I-
plans for the roads improvements there, the traffic congestion that undoubtedly is going to happen with 135 residences, 300 some cars a day?
Thank you. Fair enough. Any other takers at this time? Public comment? Well, seeing none, I guess we'll close that part and we'll go on with
Yeah, now, if there are
Commission.
questions from
Yeah,
the
from the
commission
commission,
for
sure.
either staff, applicant? Yes.
I do believe the gentleman asked the same question that was on my mind earlier, but, you know. Thank you. You're welcome. Okay.
So for any project that the city undertakes, we do require them to provide traffic study and analysis, and that's also part of what WashDOT will review in terms of the channelization improvements as well. They will take that data into account in terms of determining how the intersections will be improved and how to manage all the turning movements that are there. So that is part of the condition that they would have to meet, is to do that traffic study and then work with WashDOT, because WashDOT has authority over the highway and a certain distance for intersection streets that are coming to it. So they will look at that and provide the improvements that are needed. We know that with the drawings that is included in the packet, that they have started and initiated that process with WashDOT to look at those intersections.
If I could follow on to that, Mr. Kimack is correct. One of the conditions of approval is actually says that prior to transportation concurrency, which is a threshold that the city has to make a determination on, basically that the project can work in the community with the community streets, the applicant must submit a revised transportation study and plans demonstrating compliance with WashDOT and city-required channelization improvements. And I won't read the rest of it, but the point being is that we already have a good understanding from a preliminary perspective. One of the things that the applicant has to work on as they continue to move forward is to continue that coordination with WashDOT and the city, fine-tuning those plans. And if I could, just a quick side, this is one of the complexities that Mr. Swanson mentioned when he was speaking, the coordination between the applicant's engineer, the city engineer, and WashDOT and their engineers led to these conditions of approval being in front of the Planning Commission tonight.
Okay.
I've got a number of questions, and stop me if I'm getting too far down in the weeds. So for example, I saw in your packet that some of the detail that's provided by the applicant is not really necessary. For example, location of stop signs and some of these other things. But I couldn't help but notice that it seems like there's an absence of a street light on the north loop of the proposed Gary Oak Road where it goes a long distance between lights. Again, is that too far down in the weeds?
Those will be picked up in the civil plans, Mr. Hovey. That's part of what our engineering staff will look at when they get into that level of construction plan. They'll make sure those lights are appropriately placed.
Next thing is into landscaping. The amount of maintenance that's going to be required for this landscaping is fairly extensive. And I saw that there's a 3-year requirement for maintaining that. What happens after that? Again, I presume that you have CCNRs that are going to be produced that are going to provide some kind of system, but I know, for example, in Fireside, they have dissolved their HOA, and so right now, they don't have any system for maintaining money to do maintenance on their landscaping. Any comments on that?
So the landscaping maintenance would depend on where it is and whether it's in a tract or whether it's along the streets. Now, the street trees would eventually come to the city after that the 3-year period has passed. We're hoping that the trees would be established by then, and so there would be less maintenance.
So, for
Now,
example, along 24th and around down Highway 20, that would be,
the applicant, I think that's in a tract that belongs to the HOA.
And then typically, Mr. Hovey, there are notes on the final plat that make it clear that that one, that maintenance responsibility is the HOA's, and 2, should they disband, it falls then to each of the individual property owners as a group. So even if there's no formal HOA, the city can basically talk to the entire subdivision and say, you still have this responsibility.
okay. We've had some subdivisions where homeowners have decided to take out trees that are in the planting area between the sidewalk and the street in order to put in RV gates. But I see that it's a requirement for the homeowner to maintain those trees, so how is that handled? Is there any,
We typically say that if the landscaping that's in question is part of the approved plan, if it's integral, in other words, to the approval of the project, then you can't remove the tree without consultation with the city, or the landscaping without consultation with the city.
and is there any landscaping required on the actual lots themselves?
No, not as part of your regular subdivision. If you had a PRD, that would be different, but regular subdivisions don't require on-lot landscaping plans.
The, moving on, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around here. The trails in the park, are those considered to be public and maintained by City Public Works, or are those considered to be private and maintained by the homeowners association?
So the park is going to be dedicated to the city. It will become a public park. Sidewalks that are along the street and within the street right away will be the city's responsibility. The crosswalks are usually in tracks and therefore would be HOA responsibility.
Thank you. And looks like my last question. Nope, I've got some more. As far as this transportation with Highway 20 and the state, is there any provision for a crosswalk across Highway 20? There's going to be a transit, well, there is a transit stop on the east side of Highway 20, directly across from 24th, and you've got 135 houses worth of people that presumably are going to want to try and get across that street. It's already dangerous enough street with people slowing from 50 miles an hour to supposedly 40 miles an hour.
So I'm pretty sure our city engineer's here. Like, that's a great question for him to answer.
I saw him somewhere in the back. Here he comes.
I don't want you to feel left out, Jim. Thank you.
So if I understand the question, is there going to be a crosswalk across SR 20?
Correct.
That would be under the approval of State Department of Transportation for that to happen. I haven't seen one on the set of plans or in the preliminary plat proposed yet, so that's the best answer I can give you right now.
Is that something that the city would intervene and request, or how does that work?
Well, I think the better approach would be to work with Island County Transit to to put a stop on the west side. And I think WashDOT would probably promote that and accept that solution as well, as I don't think it's a safe condition as you described.
Okay. Thank you, that's all I have.
Okay.
I'm going to ask the question. It's a system that I've seen occurring more and more. No fencing along 20 in these homes, is that correct? Just earthen landscaping?
I believe that the landscape plans do show fencing along Highway 20 and 24th, and the landscaping is outside of those fences.
So the properties, I didn't see that. That's
I think the landscaping plans, if I'm correct, has fencing along the property lines in the back. Yeah.
okay. I too are concerned about the amount of traffic, but I'm also a believer that, we continue to push out into these areas along Fort Nugent. We'll be looking at something along Swantown. We've done the same thing, and everything comes back into Swantown and 20. But virtually everything that goes north or goes off island comes through Oak Harbor, so there's not a whole lot we can do. But what I can say is I've noticed the county's doing an awful lot in their jurisdiction, okay, and no one's saying anything about that. It still impacts our city, and it always will until WashDOT actually builds the proposed additions at Swantown and 20. But as I also understand, there's going to be several changes to the traffic patterns through our city to kind of address some of this traffic. But we've still got people coming in. We've still got people that needs to live here. And myself, I think it's a very good project. It is going to be staged, and hopefully when the third and fourth phase gets built, something would have started to happen with the traffic control at Swantown, because that's going to be your biggest bottleneck. And then the next one is down farther. But we're even building them in other locations on top of that. So, but the problem is going to be 20, and always has been and always will be. Other than that, I was okay with most of the information that was provided. I think staff has done a good job on answering the questions that I had. Staff and the contractor, I'm glad that they've worked together to bring a quality product together. I see a lot of pedestrian walkways and things like that that's going to encourage that type of use. So I'm ready to move forward.
Steve, can we get an idea of, I know I believe that SR 20 is being moved up a little bit as far as maybe some relief coming into town from the south at Swantown.
Yes.
Is that like a,
In fact, Mr. Oborn
20 or 21?
is working hard on that right now, so if you wouldn't mind, I'll let him address that question.
Yeah, we do, I do participate, and so does CAC on the Island Regional Transportation Planning Organization, IRTPO is what we call it for short. So we are looking at it. It's one of the main projects in the near future to study it as an intermodal point of view. I think CAC is a really expert on this. We did, back in 2005, have roundabouts. There was a whole design, but that was quite a long time ago, so I think taking a look at it. The DOT has it on their calendar for 2027. But certainly, I think at the regional level, we're advocating it a lot sooner than that, and we'll continue to work on it. But it being even on the calendar for DOT is progress.
I was hoping for a 2020, 2021 type program.
I think that's what I'm kind of hoping for too, but it takes a lot to move it up. But it is a really, looking at all the projects in the county, it is a serious bottleneck and a serious issue. So I think it's got a lot of priority there, and it's been on the WashDOT's calendar. Like I said, the study was done back in 2005, so it's a lot of history there and really needs to be addressed, and we'll continue to advocate for it.
Just to reiterate, SR 20 and the improvements along there is considered as a regional project, not just a city project. And so even though 2027 seems so far out, there's a lot of preparation in looking at that corridor as a regional project and trying to bring solutions, not just for the city, but for Island County, WashDOT, Island Transit. All of them could be partners in designing that corridor. And so that's what Blaine and I, working through the RTPO, is trying to establish, that the corridor study that needs to be done and the collaboration between all these agencies need to come together in order for this project to actually happen. And all of that timing will lead us to that 24-25 margin. Hopefully, we can push that money a little bit ahead. Even if we push it a couple years ahead, I think it'll be beneficial.
Thank you, CAC. Is the commission done with their deliberations? Is there any other comments and concerns?
No.
Questions? If not, I will close the public hearing then. At this time, do we entertain a motion?
I move to recommend to the City Council the approval of the preliminary plat and landscape plans for the Village of Gary Oaks project, subject to the attached conditions of approval.
So I have a motion
I second the motion.
and a second. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes.
I move that the Planning Commission adopt the findings of fact.
I second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. If we might take just a brief meeting, a break, because I believe the next part of our session here is going to go on a little bit longer. So let's take 10 minutes. September 24, 2019 Planning Commission meeting, City of Oak Harbor. At this time, we will take on item B under public hearings. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on the preliminary plat, PRD, and associated permits and documents for a proposed 11-lot subdivision located at 2870 Southwest Scenic Heights Street. The proposed subdivision is located on 2 existing single-family lots, with each of these homes proposed to be demolished. Landscaping and native vegetation in shoreline area is proposed along with the development.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wassinger.
Okay, so
We will go through our appearance of fairness questions on this application as well. So starting at the top of the script, RCW 4236 requires that members of this body determine prior to staff presentation of a quasi-judicial matter whether the appearance of fairness doctrine requires that he recuse himself from sitting on the matter. In light of that requirement, I will ask you some questions before we begin the hearing. I will ask the questions as a group, then call upon each commissioner asking for your response. Question number 1, does any member of this commission have knowledge of or have conducted business with either the proponents or opponents of this application? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
no.
Mr. Hovey?
Yes.
Okay. Would you care to explain what that knowledge is or conducting of business is?
I am a professional, I've had a professional relationship with Mr. Thompson only in the degree that he purchased a property that our company represented the seller. He was represented by a different agent at the company. And I've had, several professional conversations with him.
Thank you. Question number 2, does any member of this commission either have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in the outcome of this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
Mr. Hovey?
No.
Number 3, does any member of this commission know whether or not their employer has a financial interest in the property or area which will be impacted by the decision in this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
Mr. Hovey?
No.
Number 4, does any member of this commission live or own property within 300 feet of the area which will be impacted by the decision in this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
And Mr. Hovey?
Yes.
And do you live or own property then within 300 feet?
Yes, my property's approximately 200 feet away from the property that we're going to be discussing here. At this time, I'd also like to note that I'm aware that a lot of my neighbors, both across the street and next door to me, have been signees of one of the comments that's in the packet today. I am not aware of having been invited to sign that letter, and I did not sign the letter.
Thank you, Mr.
I was
Hovey.
not aware of the letter until I reviewed the packet on Friday.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hovey. Number 5, does any member of this commission have any special knowledge about the substance of the merits of this proceeding which would or could cause the commission member to prejudge the outcome of this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
Mr. Hovey?
No.
Number 6, is there any member of this commission who believes that he cannot sit and hear this matter fairly and impartially, both as to the respective positions of the proponents and the opponents in this proceeding? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
And Mr. Hovey?
No.
Number 7, has any commission member had any ex parte contacts concerning this matter? Mr. Phillip?
No.
Mr. Freeman?
No.
Mr. Wassinger?
No.
And Mr. Hovey?
Yes.
Will you care to put those on the record, please?
Sure. I was over in the park several months ago in Windjammer Park, it was before the park opened up, and I was taking some pictures of the construction, and Mr. Thompson and his wife were out walking, and Mrs. Thompson recognized me and said hi. So I stopped and chatted with him briefly. I said something to the effect of, I understand that you're developing that lot that you own over on Scenic Heights into 6 houses, and he said something to the effect of, well, it looks like it's going to be 11. And I said, oh, okay, well, we better not talk about that because it's going to come before the Planning Commission. And that was the extent of the conversation. It lasted less than 5 minutes, probably closer to 2.
Thank you, Mr. Hovey. That takes me to question number 8. Is there any member of the audience who, because of the appearance of fairness doctrine, wishes to disqualify any member of the commission from hearing this matter? Can I have you on the microphone, please, Mr. Hewlett?
I just have a question on threshold. If you have yes responses to any of these questions, does that automatically require that person to be recused?
It does not, but it's an excellent question. A yes answer to any of the questions does not present immediate grounds for the member to recuse him or herself. Seeing no other questions or members of the audience who wish to challenge, Mr. Bossinger, I'll turn this back over to you.
Okay, very good. This is a public hearing for the Hillside Scenic Heights application. Members of the audience will be given an opportunity to speak to the matter. A maximum of 3 minutes per public speaker will be allowed, provided that the commission may, in its discretion, allow for additional time where the complexity of issues involved requires more time in order to give the public speaker a reasonable opportunity to be heard on the matter. No speaker shall be allowed to cede his or her time to another speaker. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing, and Ray, ask you to speak to the matter, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Ray Lindenberg, Associate Planner for the City of Oak Harbor. I'm going to talk to you about the Hillside Development Center PRD subdivision tonight. And I'm just going to run through some brief details here. The remote is not working. There we go. Okay, so we have 2 separate parcels, as you noted earlier. Each of those parcels formerly contained or included a single-family residence. One of those residences has been demolished. The other still remains. Those are located at 2870 and 2910 Southwest Scenic Heights Street. In the comprehensive plan designation, they are low-density residential. In the zoning, they are R1, which is single-family residential, and that'll come into play in a little while when I talk a little bit more about that. And the Shoreline Master Program, which touches the lower portion of the property, is in the Residential Bluff Conservancy area. The overall site area is 3.27 acres. The proposed number of lots is 11, and that gives a density of 3.4 dwelling units per acre. The applicant has provided 1.6 acres of open space, and as of note, and will probably come up later as well, a significant portion of that is in tidelands. And the reasoning behind this is when those properties were platted before Washington was a state, that's how they were legally platted, and it carried over when Washington became a state. Those became private tidelands for the property owners up above, and they are counted as land when we figure out density and open space and things like that now, 120 years later. So that's where we're at. It is a 3.27 acre parcel, and it does include that tideland area, and that's how they get the calculation to get 11 homes on that property, or on those 2 properties. To give a brief history here, as Mr. Hovey noted, the project originally started out as a 6-lot short plat on the 2910 property. It came in and we discussed the design of the project, and there were a number of issues with the original design that kind of made it difficult to fit the lots in there how the applicant wanted them. And so later on, the applicant was able to acquire the property to the north at 2870, and then resubmitted for a pre-app application review in March of this year to look at 11 lots. We were able to go over some comments in a pre-application review meeting and discuss what are the requirements for that review, and he submitted a PRD and preliminary plat application in May. Now, some of your materials, you'll note, have an older date from November, the application material, and it talks about a 6-lot subdivision, and that was our mistake. Substantively, it doesn't change what we're talking about. The application materials might say 6 lots and refer to the one address, but the staff report, all the engineering reports, all of that include the full 11-lot subdivision. We do have copies of the 11-lot application form for review if necessary, but we didn't feel that was a significant issue, but we can certainly provide that to you. In July, we talked about the comments from the preliminary plat in August. They submitted revised information for staff review, including a revised geotechnical report, which we'll discuss later. And then in September, a SEPA mitigated determination of non-significance was issued. The appeal period on that ended yesterday, and so here we are on the 24th, ready to talk about the PRD and preliminary plat. So to discuss a little bit very briefly about the applications that are under review, this is very similar to the process that CAC talked about earlier, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into that. The addition that we have here from the previous project is the PRD application and the shoreline substantial development permit. For the most part, a lot of this information is going to be the same. And then we did have the SEPA checklist that came in. The thing is about the SEPA checklist is you do not review that. That's a staff level review. We've done that process. We went through an appeal period, and so there is no need for the Planning Commission to review or approve that portion of the application. So the review process, as CAC mentioned previously, the City Council shall establish or shall inquire into the public use and interest proposed to be served by the establishment of the subdivision and dedications. So we have a PRD and a preliminary plat, and I'd like to talk about for a minute some of the spatial relationships of this property. So Tim, if you could bring up that plat, please. Okay, so this is kind of giving you an idea of what the property looks like. That hatched area is the bluff, the steep portion of the bluff there, and then the area to the right or to the east is the tidal flats. Up on the upper portion of the property on the left-hand side of the hash area is a sloping property that comes down the hill from Scenic Heights Street, and that's where the 11 lots are proposed. What we have is a public street right here that will be essentially just kind of a almost traffic circle to provide access to a private road right here that serves 2 homes, and then another private road right here that serves 9 homes. You'll note that the maximum number of homes that can be served off a private road is 9, and so that's the reasoning behind that. In the middle is an open space area, an active open space area that is part of the requirements of the PRD, is they have requirements for open space. And some of that open space has to be active. It has to include a walking path or a basketball goal or a playground equipment or something along those lines. So that's in the middle of the property there.
Ray,
Yeah,
can you point it over
over
there?
there? Okay, I don't want to blind anybody with the laser pointer.
I'm
so.
just having a really hard time seeing it over here.
I see, yeah. So additionally, we have a 75-foot setback. A 65-foot setback is what was recommended by the geotechnical report from the edge of the bluff top there. And so this meets that. It's about 73 feet to some of these places, but it meets the 65 feet that was recommended in the geotechnical report. You'll also notice that these lots are significantly larger, and the reason behind that is that these lots are within the shoreline jurisdiction, and in order to have reductions in sizes for the shoreline jurisdiction, they have to go through a variance process, and that would be a separate process. And so the applicant determined it would be just a better situation to just have those be the standard size lots. So those are your typical R1 lots. They're 70 feet wide, 60 feet wide, 7,200 square feet. And they each have obviously 1 home on them. The other lots to the upper portion there are smaller, and I will discuss the permissive variations in just a moment here. So Tim, if we can switch back to the presentation, please. Okay, so our review process for the PRD includes a number of permissive variations, and what the PRD allows for is if the applicant agrees to do certain improvements or kind of higher level of design and things like that, we can go through and approve for them smaller lot sizes and some of those sorts of things. So a couple of the permitted or permissive variations that they requested had to do with lot dimensions. And the first one obviously is minimum lot sizes. Those lots are below the minimum 7,200 square feet, and they are also below the minimum width and lot depth, which is 60 feet and 90 feet respectively. This allows them to locate those homes in there to meet the minimum density of the property. Also, is a permissive variation are the setbacks, and obviously when you have smaller lots you have to have smaller setbacks, so they've requested smaller setbacks. A note to definitely take, something to definitely take note of is the front setback to living space has been reduced. However, the driveways are still required to be 20 feet long to allow for parking in the driveways, so we don't have vehicles overhanging a sidewalk or into the street and causing problems. Lot coverage is one of the variations that they're requesting, and I have a note on that. There's a star on there. We said in the staff report that they were requesting up to 40% instead of 35%. They're actually going to need to have a little bit more than that because one of those lots actually goes up to 41.13%. So what we'll do is we'll change that in the conditions of approval is just kind of a red line in there. It is important to note that 35% is your typical maximum. They have two lots that are over that. One's at 41%, one's at 38%. Those are lots 7 and 6 respectively. The other ones are all, a little bit below 35% or actually significantly below 35%. Another one of the permissive variations was straight lot lines, and that one was kind of an interpretation issue. The applicant interpreted that we were requiring essentially squares or rectangles with the curves of Scenic Heights Street and the bluff and the way that the property kind of tightens up. It's kind of a wedge shape. We didn't really see an issue with that, so we're recommending approval. We don't see too much of a real change there from straight lot lines. Another one is the provision of sidewalks on the private streets there. They've requested sidewalks on one side, and we've supported that. And then the length of the private drive, the typical maximum length there is 400 feet. They're about 430 feet, so it's a little bit longer there. And then they've also requested that 2 side sewers be placed in the same easement, which is not typically something we allow for, but we are willing to look at if the physical structure works out for separation and all that. We are willing to consider that and approve that as well.
Right.
Yes,
If I might, is there not an outfall that was just put in there,
there is, yes.
like between the two properties?
Tim, if you don't mind, if we can bring up that map again, I'll show that to you. So the outfall, the original property line runs kind of along the middle there, and that's where the outfall ran. There's kind of a swale that goes down the middle of that property, and that's where the outfall goes. And
Right.
it collects water. Oh, sorry, your habit. So it goes down the middle there, and then it goes down to the bottom of the bluff, and at the bottom, there's a T. The pipe comes down, it goes into a T that dissipates some of that energy, allows the water to run out without churning up the bottom of the bluff. It's something that's been fairly well thought out and engineered to protect that bluff. Okay, Tim, thank you. If you can put that back on. Okay, so going back to the review process, we also have the Shoreline Substantial Development Permit, which has to meet the standards of the Shoreline Master Program. Staff has determined that this project does meet those requirements. We also have a landscape plan, which is required to meet the standards of OHMC 1946 and also of the PRD section of the code. We have determined that the application does meet those requirements as well. And then we have a land clearing plan, and that will affect the removal of trees on the property. There are already some trees removed, as I'm sure the neighbors noticed. We had a situation where there was some vegetation removed from the bluff top, and we informed the applicant or the property owner that that was not allowed. And so that has ceased, and that will be subject to a mitigation of replanting of native vegetation in that location because that is in the Shoreline Master Program area. So based on the application and the findings that we have, or the review that we've done here, was we were recommending a positive recommendation to the preliminary plat, preliminary PRD, and the associated permits, subject to the conditions of approval. And again, I note that the conditions of approval will have a couple of minor changes. One is to allow the lots as they're described on there up to 42% instead of 40% of built area. And then there was a condition regarding a garbage truck turnaround, and the city engineer, Jim Bridges, has agreed to strike that. We will work with the applicant to ensure that there is proper turnaround for the garbage truck without requiring the new one to the north end of that driveway. And those are the only two changes that we have to the conditions of approval based on the last few days of discussion with the applicant and just going over it as staff. So I will turn it back over and allow the applicant to make a presentation.
Mr. Chairman, before we move on to hear from the applicant, City Engineer Jim Bridges would like to brief the commission on the some late-breaking engineering news, if I can phrase it that way.
Thank you. Oh, two of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Mr. Chairman, if you will, due to the complexity of the geotechnical report that was prepared for this project by the proponent's engineering team, we decided to seek a third-party peer review to look at that geotechnical report. There were several comments from the public that addressed the concerns. Our third-party engineer has reviewed that report and has made some recommendations and conclusions and does agree with the proponent that the 75-foot setback is adequate for the protection. There is some discrepancy between the two reports in the slide rate. However, our geotechnical engineer that was a third-party review has provided the applicant engineering team with his previous engineering report so that they can see that and take check their analysis for one more time. Prior or going forward, what all this means is prior to the applicant getting any permits for construction and approvals on the civil plans, they will still have to submit a final engineering report on the geotechnical conditions on that bluff. So what I've handed you tonight is the third-party peer review. The applicant's engineering team just got that this afternoon. We felt that it was important enough that to get this done immediately, and they have not had a chance to review it and look at the analysis. It's unfortunate, but you know, that's we take responsibility for that, but they will be looking at that going forward.
And if I could tag onto that, Mr. Chairman, we received it from our third-party reviewer last night at 4:30. That's why the Planning Commission wasn't provided a copy of it in your packet. You may be wondering whether or not this would be covered by any of the conditions of approval that staff has already proposed to you. While it's not specifically part of a condition of approval for the plat, we do have a sufficiently broad SEPA mitigation requirement that states that staff review and approval of engineering reports would be required before permits are issued for any construction. I've verified with Mr. Bridges that that's sufficient to cover his concerns or the topics that he wants to see addressed in a revised report from the applicant. So from the staff perspective, we think that this topic has been addressed, and the applicant will be provided an opportunity to review both the third-party review and then look at their documents as well.
So would any additional be provided, or is this the end-all, be-all?
That's it in terms of the city's third-party review. The applicant will revise their geotechnical report accordingly and then submit that to the city for Mr. Bridges' review, and then he will have the final approval authority before any permits are issued. So again, we've got this condition under the SEPA process that is a sort of a catch-all that is intended to catch these kinds of things.
Thank you.
Now it would be appropriate for us to hear from the applicant.
Yeah, the applicants.
Good morning, or good afternoon, evening, Planning Commission members. My name is Clay White. I am the Director of Planning for LDC on behalf of the applicant. So I'll be here to answer any land use questions that you might have tonight. With me also is Mark Vilwalk, who's our Vice President. He is the engineer of record for this project as well, if you have questions on engineering. And then we also have Carolyn Decker, who prepared the geotechnical report. And so if you have any questions on those items, I would be the wrong person, but Carolyn is here to answer those questions for you. Really appreciate the work that staff did in putting together the staff report and information for you. It was very thorough. We agree with the staff report and their recommendations. In addition to the staff recommendation, we also agree with the 34 conditions that they've proposed for this project, with the 2 minor changes that staff brought up during their staff report regarding just where that turnaround for garbage would be. That's condition 19, and just the minor change for the impervious surface. But other than that, we agree with all 34 conditions. And we've also reviewed the findings, and we agree with the findings that staff has prepared for you to consider as you look at this PRD. The other nice thing about the staff report is that the PRD, it goes into several different topical areas, and so the staff report does a great job of kind of breaking down each one of those. And it's taken the information from our application, and then they've reviewed that. We've worked with them, and that's how that conclusion has been drawn, that we meet or exceed the requirements of Oak Harbor Municipal Code. Obviously, the record has all of our information that's also, as they've done the review, has gotten into that report. If you would like high-level information, such as like on page 146 of your report, is like our project narrative. So you've got a packet, and it goes through how we meet each of the code requirements for a PRD, but all of that information is summarized within the staff report. So I think just like the previous application, I'm not going to go into too much depth because staff did a good job of going through the application. There's a couple of things that I will note, though. The R1 zoning requires a density between 3 and 6 dwelling units per acre. I think that's worthy of noting, whether you're doing a PRD or just standard subdivision. A lot of codes might say you can have up to 6 dwelling units per acre, so you can have anywhere between 1 and 6. Oak Harbor Municipal Code actually requires that we have a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 6. We've proposed more on the minimum side, around 3.4 dwelling units per acre. But as an example, we came in and said we want 2 dwelling units per acre. That wouldn't meet code. We couldn't come in with something that would be below 3. And that's, kind of based upon being in a city, urban densities. But we are on the low side of that. And I think it's also worth noting that we do have the tidal flat area, which is being reserved. But we meet the open space requirements, active and passive, even if you remove those areas. So there's a significant portion of the site that's been left in open space, even outside of those tidal areas. So I thought that would be good to mention as well. I know there'll be public comment. All 3 of us are here to answer any questions that you might have, especially after listening to public comment, and we look forward to doing that to the best of our abilities.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other members want to present at this time?
I don't think we have anybody else that would want to present at this time unless you have specific questions about the engineering, drainage, or geotechnical reports.
Very good, then. Then we'll go ahead with the members of the audience that would like to speak. And first on my list is Patty Cohen. Would you like to address us, please?
Patty Cohen, 2830 Southwest Scenic Heights Street, Oak Harbor. Chairman Wassinger, members of the Planning Commission, my remarks are based upon a petition signed by over 90 residents in the Scenic Heights neighborhood. I submit the following to you. Wrights Crossing is seeking approval of a PRD proposal that will dramatically alter the density in the Scenic Heights neighborhood, 11 homes on approximately 1.65 acres. The Scenic Heights neighborhood from SR 20 and Scenic Heights Street to Balda is defined as low-density single-family homes. Escalating traffic volume and excessive speeds on Scenic Heights have led to major safety concerns for the neighborhood. We respectfully request that this body re-examine the hillside development proposal as it relates to an intense density request. We believe this request will constitute an incompatible use with the surrounding low-density single-family homes in the entire neighborhood. A geology report was submitted by the applicant as required. Inaccuracies in the original report were identified and a follow-up report was undertaken. Every property owner within this environment experiences bluff erosion, slope failure, and underground runoff. We believe the issue of bluff stability remains in question. The proponent of the PRD, without a proper permit, removed native vegetation and trees from the area. These actions were very concerning to the adjoining property owners. The applicant has requested various waivers from city development standards, citing City Code Section 21.50.040, states no waiver shall be granted which is not in the public interest, and specifically states that part of the state regulation of subdivisions is to prevent for the overcrowding of land. 11 homes could not be placed on this property without the city considering or waiving development standards. Our petition to re-examine the Hillside Development Center as it relates to intense density is based on the shoreline management policies regulating residential uses and policies protecting against bluff erosion and slope failure, incompatible land use, poor ingress and egress on scenic heights, and the requested waiver considerations. The Oak Harbor Shoreline Management Plan, Chapter 2, states that the basic intent of the shoreline environment designation is to preserve and enhance the eco-function and to encourage development that will enhance the present or desired character of the shoreline neighborhood. Shoreline segments are given designations based on existing development patterns, biological capabilities, environmental limitations, and community values and objectives. Hillside Development Center is in the Residential Bluff Conservancy designation. It's the belief of the undersigned petitioners that this proposal does not represent community values and objectives in this designation. It's also the belief that the intense density development will dramatically alter, forever alter, development patterns, leading to an increased degradation of the Scenic Heights Bluff Conservancy area. Thank you, and I have copies of the signed petition for each of them members.
Thank you, Pat. This time I'd like to call on James Flowers. Would you like to?
My name is James Flowers. I live at 3506 Southwest Grinches Lane. Member of the commission. I prepared a couple of notes I'd like to read to you. Aside from the environmental issues, well presented, Scenic Heights Road is a low-density residential area. Our road is narrow, hilly, and has blind corners, especially in the proposed high-density areas. Future homeowners and local residents would have very poor traffic visibility and short reaction times to use the roadway. If you must, a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit would have to be required in this area. Nowhere is there room for extra parking. Should they have company or temporary extra piece of equipment, what are they able to do? Look at the problems already at the apartments as you turn south onto Scenic Heights Road. This area is not served by a community transit or even sidewalks. Because of its low density, is one of the most frequently used roadways for marathons and bicycle events. Please consider the adverse congestion effects to this proposed area and the difficult access conditions the developers and realtors are proposing to sell our community. As I read in the paper this week, it is not the realtors or builders' job to protect the public. Their job is to make money. Protecting the public falls in the hands of government. Please consider carefully the adverse conditions at this location the residents and new homeowners would have to deal with. One other thing that came to my attention while I was at the meeting tonight is that there are two primary access roads from the south to Oak Harbor, Scenic Heights and Highway 20. As bad as I think Scenic Heights could get, Gary Oaks is going to put incredible pressure on Scenic Heights. There's no way around it. So my remarks would be even more critical than I wrote.
Okay, thank you.
Can I leave a copy for you?
Sure, of course.
Or just leave it with Sarah, Mr. Flowers. You can just leave it with Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, she'll. Thank you, Mr. Flowers. Kevin Carmen?
Hello, council members. My name is Kevin Carmen. I'm a 48-year resident. I've had a 12-year excavation business. wanted to state that during those 12 years, I would say less than 1% of the work I've done has been in the city of Oak Harbor. The reason being it's for development, it is hard for developers, contractors, or whatnot to get any work done in amount of time, reasonable amount of time. So me personally, in my business, I live here, but I don't work here. And that is due to, I've talked with different companies and whatnot, and it is so hard to get permits, building, and work done in a reasonable amount of time. When I say a reasonable amount of time, I'm not talking, it takes a long time to get anything pushed through. I've currently been acquired by a company here in Oak Harbor, and I think this is a good project. I've looked at it, and my main thing is I just wanted to bring to you that I think the permitting process needs to be eased up for the city of Oak Harbor.
Thank you, Kevin. Ken and Terry Hewlett, which and or both?
Excuse me, my name is Ken Hewlett. My wife and I reside at 2820 Southwest Scenic Heights Street. I'm going to restrict my remarks to the geotech area. A lot of the other stuff has been covered very well in the previous comments. Originally, the May of this year geotech report by Terra Associates indicated that after soils testing and so forth, that there was an absence of groundwater seep on the bluff, and that was the primary reason for saying that these slopes were stable. And I provided in public input in June a number of pictures showing multiple seeps on the subject property at the beach level, and photos showing slides of a couple of pictures of a couple of previous slides in the neighboring area. City staff visited the site and where they viewed the presence of the groundwater seeps, and additional geologic information was required from the developer. So additional soil drilling took place, and the follow-up report acknowledges that they saw one of the 3 existing seeps. I don't know what happened to the other 2 while they were there, but this was even in the midst of the driest months of summer. And they're there now. They were there a week ago as well. But the presence of seeping water at the toe of the bluff did not change the opinion of the person in making the report, and they stuck by the conclusion that the bluff was stable. The inspector also made the comment that he didn't check the face of the bluff to determine at what depth the water was coming out of the bank, because it was covered with blackberries. So he just didn't want to deal with that. So I understand that. But it does affect the worthiness of the conclusion. There's a lack of slide debris. There have been a lot of slides that have occurred, and it's pretty easy to tell just by looking, even at this time of year when there's a lot of vegetation on the slopes, you can tell what areas have had slide occurrences. But there's not much debris along the bottom of the bank because of tidal action and wind and storms and so forth. It just cleans itself up, or at least spreads it around. The other major part of this has to do with stormwater, and as we saw earlier in the Gary neighborhood plan, that shows stormwater coming in the direction of Scenic Heights. There is that new outfall there, and apparently because it dumps into the salt water, that it's considered exempt from any sort of treatment, which is kind of an oxymoron, frankly. See, my time's up, but I just wanted to thank you for your consideration and appreciate the fact that being on this commission, like many other things, requires a whole lot more time and dedication than a lot of us see on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Terry Hewlett?
I'm Terry Hewlett, 2820 Southwest Scenic Heights. And Mr. Hovey, I just wanted to let you know the reason why we didn't ask you to sign any letter is the same reason why we didn't ask Greg or Lisa Wassinger, is because of your position on the boards.
I
So we
appreciate it.
took
Thank
that
you.
into consideration.
Thank you, Terry. Chris Anderson?
Last application,
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
that's correct, sorry. Yep. Gwen Watson? Same. Ricky Stroh or Grow? Hetland? Is there a Hetland? Hal Watson? Joe Bergen? Lynn Bergen? Yep.
Lynn Bergen, 2520 Southwest Pete's Lane. That is maybe 7 or 8 houses north of this development site. We've been living there for 14 years. With a dog to walk, I'm on that beach all the time. And I can tell you that there is sloughing regularly every year. There is water pouring out of numerous areas, including ours. Sometimes it is a torrent of water coming out down there. I can't say it's right at that site, but it is down along that area. After the shoreline management was brought forth, our neighborhood, we consist of 5 homeowners. We decided to take neighborhood action to protect our bluff. We take it very seriously. There's no green dumping. We have a moratorium on cutting down trees. We are replanting with native vegetation, and we haul our recycling up to Scenic Heights so that the big garbage trucks do not have to come down onto our road and add added pressure to our private driveway. We do have a small garbage truck that comes down for our trash. So it seems to me that this high density and shallow setback is flying in the face of what shoreline management has suggested, and is very disturbing to us in that we have tried so hard to protect our bluff, and what happens down the road from us is going to affect us as well. Also, Scenic Heights is, I don't really walk down it very often because it is dangerous, and more cars there I think will make matters worse. I know I often just cut up Friend to avoid some of the traffic. So I would like for you all to consider this, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Jeannie Bragan? No. Tim Bergman?
Tim Bergman, 3259 Southwest Scenic Heights Street. I'm just a little bit further south than the proposed development. I've born and raised, I was born in the old seaplane base. My dad was retired Navy here. We live in Pat Cohen's top story of her family's first house. A couple observations. We also own the lot across the street from us on the bluff. If there is any question about the stability of that area, I encourage any of these people to come down and look at our property. There is approximately 120 feet by 50 feet deep that's sloughed off in the last 2 years. That area is completely unstable. I was asked by some good friends a couple weeks ago if we'd ever considered a trail down our property to the beach, and my comment was it would simply be gone in a couple years. So our 75-foot setback is today, and my proposal is it's going to be a 60-foot setback in 5 years from now. High density, we are a small neighborhood. Pat walks her dog, I walk our dogs down the street further down because the traffic is so bad where her house is and where this development is proposed that having another 15, 20 cars coming in and out of there is craziness. along the lines of craziness to consider the tidelands in part of this land calculation. Those rules were made in the 1800s, did I hear? Last check, this was 2019. Rules change, conditions change, and you as elected public officials have a responsibility to base your considerations on today's conditions and facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Is that Brad Swanson? Brad Swanson? I was Brad Swanson.
Application,
Yeah.
Mr. Wassinger.
The address got me confused. Okay, Cindy Hoskins. Cindy?
Cindy Hoskins, 2990 Southwest Scenic Heights Street. My concerns about this development are many of the same ones that everybody else has expressed here, but my biggest disappointment is how the city is handling this job. There was a time when I went in last December to talk to Ray about my concerns and such, and he mitigated it with me by saying, well, in 10 years, you're not even going to notice it. I don't know how you can go from saying that to saying, yes, and we've made this provision for him, we made that provision for him, and we made this provision, and trying to get this project done. Somewhere, I think, the city needs to be accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Jake Cohen?
Good evening. My name is Jacob Cohen. I'm the husband of Patty Cohen, who spoke first, and I'm here to amplify on some of the subjects that she discussed. We live at 2830 Southwest Scenic Heights, which is immediately north of the project. We share a boundary line with the project, so we are more concerned than most people about exactly what's going to be built next to us. We believe that 11 units on the 1.67 acres that can be built upon will result in a density of 6.6 dwellings per acre on the building site. In other words, the city meets the density requirement, but the density requirement includes unusable tidelands as a practical matter, and the Planning Commission should give some thought to perhaps in the future there should be a modification of the ordinances on that subject, but they're vested at this point, the developers, so we're stuck with the way the situation is as it currently exists. This project could not be capable of putting 11 units on there without the city granting variances and waivers. That's addressed in Chapter 2150 of the General Design Standards of the City of Oak Harbor. In Section .040, it says, a waiver shall be granted only upon a finding that strict compliance with the provisions for subdivisions, short subdivisions, dedications could cause unusual and unnecessary hardship on the developer due to the following. And the one it fits into is because of the size of the tract to be subdivided. The developer paid a lot of money for this property, and I don't blame him for wanting to put as many units as possible on there in order to spread out the land costs, because I develop land for a living myself and I understand that concept. But what's going on here is a tremendous overcrowding of the property. I believe personally that 5 units on the property would be more appropriate, and I rely on this, that in the section I just recited of the city code, it says in Section 2 of 25.50.040 that no waiver shall be granted which allows a subdivision of property which is not in compliance with the public interest as identified in RCW 58.17.010. Now, 58.17.010 is the state standards for subdivision. It reads, the purpose of this chapter is to regulate the subdivision of land and to promote the public health, safety, and general welfare in accordance with standards established by the state. And the first standard they said is to prevent the overcrowding of land. I want to say that about two more times so you understand this, to prevent the overcrowding of land, to prevent the overcrowding of land, because that's what's occurring here. You're putting 11 units on 1.67 acres, which results actually in 6.6. Technically, it meets the density requirements, but it's an overburdening of the land. And this can only be happening because of the fact that the city staff, which is their right, the city staff has recommended basically that every development standard in the town be waived. I don't know if you've gone through all this in any detail, but there was a engineering report submitted by LDC under August 19th, 2019, where it talks about they're asking for.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cohen's time is up.
All right. Anyway, I suggest you can. They're asking for 12 to 15 waivers of everything, and this project could not be accomplished without that. If they met the regular standards, I think they could put 5 units on there. And I'm not opposed to 5 units. I believe the man should have the right to use his property as he wants. But 11 is overcrowding and does not comply with the state code.
Thank you, Jake. Frank Murphy? I can't read the last name. Does anyone else like to come to the podium? Yes.
I'm Pat Gardner on Shelley Lane off of Scenic Heights. Something came to point on environment. Everybody that has spoken, I'm in total agreement. They've been wonderful and they've hit it on the nose, especially Patty. Recently, I was at the University of Washington's Research Center at Shannon Point over there in Anacortes. And we were talking about the runoff of pollutants into the waters throughout Washington state. And I don't think this would help the environment anymore. It would probably create more runoff into the bay, pollutants, et cetera. I mean, the bay's pretty dead along the beach area there a little bit, and smelly, but that's the way the tidal way, tides go. But I'm concerned about the environment in that regard of the wash, and the gentleman I had met with, I was there on another subject, but we discussed this, and it's all over Washington state where the people with sewers or chemicals or whatever in their yards, things that are going off into the bays, in our waters, and our plant life and animals. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else like to take the podium at this time? Okay. Seeing none, then the commission would like to ask any questions of anyone.
Yes, Mr. Kevin. I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name, sir. You were talking about the current runoff of water and everything else, water seepage. Are there any current photos of this? Yes. Do you have them with you?
I'm sorry, Mr. Hewlett, can I get you on the microphone so that we can have you on the record? That would be great.
Ken Hewlett.
Ken. Oh, I'm sorry.
Ken
I'm sorry,
Hewlett
Ken.
again. Yes, we have current and historical pictures, both of that. And some were provided in the June
Right, I have
public
the-
response. It's
Right.
a little hard to see them because of the coloration and so forth, but I'd be happy to do a field trip if you guys want to go down and take a look at what's really going on down there. It's pretty significant.
Okay. Bruce, you got anything?
I've got a lot of stuff. Okay. First of all, Ray, you made a comment about that the PRD allows variances, and what the code says is in return for a higher quality site and architectural design with intent of encouraging the design of more complete and sustainable neighborhood environments consistent with a comprehensive plan. What exactly is considered to be a higher quality site and architectural design?
Excuse me. It has to do primarily with materials and exterior design of the buildings themselves. Something known as four-sided architecture, where you don't just treat the front of the building as if it were important, you treat all sides. One of the concerns that we had with this project is the visibility from Scenic Heights Street, and especially the visibility of some of the back sides of those homes. And so their proposal was to do what I consider, and I don't know what the exact term is, but coastal modern kind of architecture that includes higher quality exterior materials and just a better design, rather than going to something that looks kind of quote unquote like a tract house that has, you know, either vinyl siding or T111 or something along those lines. Part of it also has to do with the landscaping that's included as a part of the PRD. The location of the homes nearer to the street rather than being kind of set back with a garage dominating the front. The garage is going to dominate anytime you have, you know, a narrower home like that, but the architecture is kind of, you know, used to mitigate that and to make it less like just a giant garage face. So that's kind of the concept.
And if you wouldn't mind,
Sure.
Ray, Mr. Hovey, and forgive me if you already know this, but the primary difference between a PRD process and the preliminary plat process, like we saw in the last application, is that for the preliminary plat, or just the plain plat, if you will, they're not required to provide elevations of the homes that they intend to build. They're not required, as you learned, to provide detailed landscaping plans for the lots themselves. The PRD requires that. In fact, we typically condition that the buildings that are shown to those are the ones that they have to build, and that's how you as the commission or the council would ensure that higher level of quality, which is shown at the application time, actually is what ends up at the site when it's built, should it be approved. So that's the fundamental difference there.
Now into some of my other questions, and bringing, you know, piggybacking a little bit on some of the public comments too, probably. This concept of including the tidelands as part of the calculation of density just kind of seems counterintuitive to me, not to mention, you know, not meeting with the spirit of the law, even if it does meet with the letter of the law. Has this been traditionally done this way? I mean, I know we haven't had a whole lot of bluff front development, but
You know,
it just seems crazy.
That was one of my concerns when I first reviewed the project. We talked to our city attorney about that, and you know, kind of had that discussion. And it's a part of the property. It's a part of the lot, and for whatever problems that brings up or issues that brings up, that's just how we have to count it. And it's, you know, like we was mentioned before, it was there since, you know, the 1800s. And yes, things have changed now, but the law still says that this is the parcel, this is the property. And so we have to count that. We wouldn't, the problem is that where do you draw the line of where the quote usable property ends and where the unusable property begins? And so we have to count that entire parcel. And if it's something that, you know, needs to be changed in the future, well then yeah, we can do that. But what we have right now are two parcels that are over 3 acres total, and we have to view it that way.
So Steve, let me direct this to you if I may.
Sure.
And that is, you know, where is the line between us interpreting the law versus just following the law blindly?
I'll be happy to answer that question, but before I do, I'd like to tag on to Ray's response, because it may be helpful, it may not be. The parallel that staff sees here is what we typically see with properties that are otherwise constrained by critical areas. So for instance, the common occurrence is a wetland. So if you have a piece of property that is encumbered in some portion by a wetland, the critical areas code says that you are allowed to count that area that's underneath the wetland as part of your site area when we calculate density. And the reason being is that if we were to preclude that, we are potentially at risk of having a regulatory takings, i.e. using regulations to diminish the developability or the value of that particular piece of property. And so we see a parallel here between property that's encumbered by a wetland. Let's say you have a 10-acre parcel, and 1.5 acres of that, it has a wetland on it. You calculate your density by law, not on the 8.5 acres, but on the 10 acres. And you're allowed to transfer that density from the piece that's under the wetland onto the rest of the property. So while this is not an exact same situation, we see a very strong parallel here. With that being said, trying to answer your question, we are tasked with when we believe that we understand what the law is to follow the law as closely as we can. In those areas where it may not be clear, we're tasked with interpreting the code or the law and putting forth our best recommendation as to how that particular piece of law or code applies to this particular situation. And in staff's estimation, we see, again, at the risk of repeating myself, a very strong parallel between this property and the tidal flats and the critical areas regulations that I'm referencing, and we see them as analogous situations. Therefore, that's how we reached our conclusion that the tidal flats need to be included as part of the parcel.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And again, I'm jumping around a little bit as I go through your report here. The drainage, again, I know that the city just spent a lot of money building that new outfall. That's going to have a lot of pressure both from the Gary Oaks development as well as this one. Is this system going to be tied into the new outfall that was just constructed, or are they building their own?
It will be tied into that. I can allow their engineer to talk about that a little bit more, but also to bring up one point, there was some concern brought up by public comment about contamination of that water. That water, when it goes in, gets treated before it goes out into the bay. So the water that flows off the street and into a storm drain gets treated before it goes out into the bay. I did want to point that out. But I will allow the engineer on the project to discuss more about the actual drainage system itself.
And then also, Mr. Bridges would be available to assist you as well.
Hello, my name is Mark Philwalk, and I'm a civil engineer with LDC. And so the stormwater from the proposed development of this site will be connected directly into the storm system that was recently built by the city. And before it enters the city system, it will be treated, and it's going to meet the 2014 DOE manual for stormwater for Western Washington. So it will flow through 3 different filters as we currently have it designed, and it will filter out the contaminants as outlined by the Department of Ecology stormwater manual. So any other questions on stormwater?
I may come back to it.
Okay.
Did you have something on stormwater?
So the existing drain system that flows over the bluff now, are you saying it'll be part of that same system and treated prior to going over? Or are they going to eliminate that existing outflow?
We are going to We're going to connect into that existing system,
Okay.
but prior to our water entering that system, we'll go through a filter first. So when it hits the city system, the water will meet the water qualities as required by the 2014 DOE manual. So we're leaving that existing outfall in place and just connecting to it.
For all 11 structures, how do you do that? Driveways and roofs and it's a lot of surface in a small area.
Yeah, so all the downspouts will be connected via pipes into a larger system that will be in the private road. And so that piping system in the private road will then go through a filter before it enters the city system.
And then the city will do it again. The city has it, you say, right?
The city system's built, but there's no filtration associated with what the city installed. So we're cleaning our water before it goes in the city system, and then the city systems, the whole purpose was, my understanding behind that project was to get the water to the base of the bluff so that wouldn't cause any more erosion, because before it was going over the top of the bluff, right? So that was the intent was, my understanding is with that city system was to get the water to the base of the bluff. But we will be cleaning our water before we're meeting the Department of Ecology standards before we put it into the city system.
On a different subject, in your staff report, page 97, You say that the recommended setback from the bluff is 65 feet. In the report that we got yesterday, the supplemental information on page 164 of 177 of that report, the recommended setback was at 75 feet, which is what you said today. So does the fact that this says 65 feet matter when the new data we got yesterday says 75 feet?
I'm going to defer to an engineer on that one also. The information I had was 65 feet. There was a 50-foot buffer with a 15-foot additional safety factor, essentially. So I will allow an engineer to discuss that.
Because the reason it becomes an issue is if the setback is actually 75 feet and the closest construction is 73 feet,
correct.
That means the closest construction is inside the buffer.
I'll defer to Mark again.
Mr. Bridges can help with that question, I think, as well.
Can I point out something, please, if possible? The reason it's 75 feet is because there's a restricted covenant on the property which belongs to our house and the Hewlett's house that says none of those houses can be built closer than 75 feet to the bluff. So regardless of what the city standards are or the state standards, there's a restricted covenant that prevents houses from being built within 75 feet of any point on the bluff. I think that might simplify the whole thing to everybody.
Thank you, Jay.
This is Mark Vilwalk again. We are fine with the 75-foot setback. That's our current proposal is a 75-foot setback from the top of the bluff. So we're accepting of that 75-foot setback.
Thank you.
Okay, on page 101 of our initial packet, there's a reference to Oak Harbor Municipal Code 19.31.170, where there's basically some criteria that the PRD has to meet in order to get the variances, and they don't meet the first three, and so they're going with number D, which is no two adjacent buildings on the same side of the street may have the same front setback, and the requirement is that they need to be varied by at least 2 feet or greater. The diagrams that I've looked at, it's hard to tell because you can't really see the spacing, but are they complying with that?
They are on most of them, and it appears they might not be on two houses that are very similar. We have conditioned it so that it meet that requirement. We feel like moving one house 1 foot and the other house 1 foot the opposite direction shouldn't be too hard of an ask. And so we've included that as a condition of approval that it meet that standard. That's one of those things that you kind of go through and polish and work on, and sometimes you get it exactly right, and sometimes we have to work on it a little bit more. It'll require some minor changes in the plan, but that's something that we review to make sure it meets all the conditions before it goes to construction.
Which gets us into the next issue on page 102 of the package, where you start talking to the things that Mr. Cohen referenced with the variances. So we have minimum lot size going down from 7,200 square feet down to 2,626 square feet. Minimum lot width from 60 feet down to 33 feet. Lot depth from 90 feet to 73 feet. Front yard setbacks from 20 feet down to 10 feet. Side yard setbacks, according to OHMC 19.20.120, are supposed to be either 12 feet or 5 feet. You say 5.5 feet average, but they're down to 3 feet. Minimum setbacks from 20 feet down to 5 feet. Maximum lot coverage up from 35 feet or 35%. Maximum driveway length from 400 feet to 437 feet. It seems like there's an awful lot of variances, and I can see for a PRD allowing waivers to some of these things, but when you have a lot that is now 10 feet street to house, 3 feet on the sides, 5 feet in the back, I think that there's a place for that. I don't know that this is the place for that. And I don't understand why all of these things have to vary to meet the conditions of the PRD. It seems like we've kind of, basically given everything. I don't understand why we can't put some limits on it and say, okay, if you want to have a 10-foot front setback and a 3-foot side setback, then you got to stick with the back setback at 20 feet. or something. I don't know what the right answer is, and I know that you've given this a lot of study because you've been working on this for a year. But it just seems to me, well, what are your thoughts on all that?
Okay, so a lot of what you discussed, well, first of all, let me talk about 1931 for a second, because the key thing is about 1931 and the PRD code is the permissive variations allow you to vary from the zoning code, the underlying zoning code, which is the R1 district, and the subdivision code. It doesn't allow you to vary from anything else or anything within the PRD. So that's an important criteria to think about. The second thing is that anytime you shrink down a lot, all of those other things are going to necessarily be affected. Unless you're going to start building really tall, when you have a small lot, you're going to have reduced setbacks. And when you have a small lot, you're going to increase your lot coverage. All of these things are the effect of one thing. So it's a cascading effect. You have smaller lots, so therefore you have criteria numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 that have to go along with that. And so I don't think we're giving away the farm here. I think what we're doing is saying, look, we understand that you're trying to accomplish smaller lots to put these homes on, and thereby you are having to reduce some of these numbers. And I also think that putting a house, 10 feet away from the street frontage is not necessarily an issue in and of itself. There are people who will want to have a larger lot. There are people who want to have that elbow room, and there are also people who don't. The key thing is, and that we have to review by, is this good for the health, safety, and welfare of the community? And one of the ways that we did that is we said, look, you can't put your driveway so that it's 10 feet away from the street. Your driveway still has to provide parking in it. So the driveway has to be at least 20 feet deep. Your front porch or your living room or whatever can be 10 feet away, and that's fine because that's not affecting the health, safety, and welfare of the community at large. If we were causing a situation where we're making it so you can't park in the driveway, then that might be a negative effect, and thereby we would not allow it. So that's kind of what we're looking at is, sometimes when we allow one thing, it has a cascading effect. We allow a small lot, so yeah, the setbacks are going to get smaller, and some of those other things are going to happen.
I guess part of my fear is, we point to the community up where Cordero is, and I can never remember the name of the community, where the houses are close together and there's limited parking and the streets are narrow and even turning around is fairly difficult. And, we point to that as being something that we don't want to recreate. And it's kind of a fear to me that maybe we're doing that. So getting to your point about parking, the next one that is on my list here is the driveway being 437 feet instead of 400 feet long. And when you look at the diagram of the plat, when you get down to the end of that, at the bottom of the bluff, it ends in 4 public parking spaces and a house. So if you had a garbage truck down there, or if you had a fire truck down there, I don't know how they would turn around. I honestly, if you have a car in the driveway of lot number 8 there, and you have cars parked in spots 8, 9, 10, and 11, I don't know how you would get the car out of the driveway in the house at parking spot number, or lot number 8. It seems to me like that's, excessive congestion again that was brought up in one of the public comments.
So to address a couple of the things I think you mentioned there, with regard to fire trucks, these homes will be sprinkled, and that was part of the requirement of the fire department to say, look, if you're going to have this long driveway, these houses need to be sprinkled. So hopefully that will address one of those fears. With regards to garbage trucks, the engineering comment that we're talking about striking was to provide a kind of hammerhead space there for the garbage trucks to come in this way, go up, and then turn around. The applicant proposes instead to put garbage cans down in this area and in this area and have the garbage truck come in and turn around that way. And so I believe, and the thing is too, is yeah, we've got parking spaces here and they're tight with that garage right there. Again, I go back to the concept of whether or not that's good for the community as a large versus whether it's an inconvenience for the few people that park there. There's a certain level of, you know what you're getting into when you're buying this home and you see that there's a tight parking area. I built a house myself that had a very tight driveway that I had to kind of maneuver out of, but I accepted that because I did it. And so I think that's kind of where we're at with this. If we were trying to apply this to an existing neighborhood and wedge things in there and say, okay, now you have to do this way because we've changed your parking situation, then that would be a problem to the greater community. What we're looking at here is parking that might be a problem for people and their guests, the people that live there and their guests. I don't see this creating an issue that's going to have people parking out on Scenic Heights Street or anything like that. They provided, and one of the things you mentioned, the Cordero Loop doesn't have designated parking spaces like they have along here to allow for guest parking. So I think that's a key difference too.
If I could tag on to that, Mr. Hovey, and I think Ray's covered these topics very well for you, but so I might just rephrase it a bit. Essentially what the staff is trying to do here is to balance things. Balance the need to meet our obligations under the Growth Management Act, to have infill development in our community, balance the community's needs to figure out how to create housing units within the community. These parcels are capable of supporting redevelopment. As I think all have acknowledged, the applicant has chosen to go with private streets, which means that there are different things that we don't take as much interest in as we would if they were public streets. Ray is correct, absolutely correct. One of the primary differences between that old subdivision up there on Cordero Place and this proposal, as well as other proposals, is that the city's code has evolved over time. And as we saw some of the problems that happened with narrow streets where we weren't providing additional parking places, we said that is a problem. We amended our code to require applicants to provide additional parking places besides the driveways when they have the narrower streets. One of the keys using private streets then is that the applicant and the homeowners association has responsibility for dealing with any parking requirements parking problems that they have, because they'll have to enforce that through their own CC&Rs. The city does not have the same level of enforcement that we do because it's not a public street. So again, I'm going to sort of come back to the concept of balance. What we're trying to do is to balance all of these needs, and then at the same time recognize that it is an unusual shaped piece of property. It has some unusual topography. It's encumbered in certain ways, and so that's the basis for the staff recommendation this evening.
And anybody who knows me or has seen me talk at the city council meetings or previous planning commission meetings knows that there is no stronger advocate for increased housing in this community than me. I think we absolutely need it. I just have some questions and concerns. If I can move on, page 104, you talk about the land clearing plan. And in your statement here on the land clearing plan, you say that 2 walnut trees closer to the bluff will be preserved. The landscape plan on page 166 and 167 do not reflect those 2 walnut trees being preserved. And that's despite the fact that on page 96 of the 177 out of the supplemental that we received yesterday describes both those trees as very healthy trees. So are they being preserved or are they not being preserved?
They are being preserved. I was told by the applicant they are being preserved.
And the one's being preserved?
Isn't it only one tree being preserved on the properties?
My understanding that both of them were going to be.
But
So Mr. Hovey, if that's an omission in the landscape plan, the commission would be within its purview to add that as a specific condition of approval.
As I understand it, on the plan itself, they identified 1 tree as remaining. The rest would be removed.
That would be the 50% rule. We take half of it out. That's what they said.
So just to confirm that those trees would remain, we can certainly update the landscaping plans as Director Powers mentioned.
Okay.
Did I see somewhere in there about going from accommodating 44 cars to 55 cars?
There are...
Is there 4 parking spots per residence?
There's 5 parking stalls per unit.
Including the garage spaces.
Oh, okay.
4 for every house and 1 off-street, so...
But that was modified. I think originally it was 44, am I correct?
Yeah, I think as was mentioned, part of the PRD process is working with the department, and so the plan was modified as we went along to address concerns, and that's one of the issues that's been addressed.
That's all I have for now. I'd like to come back at the end.
I've listened to each of the concerns. Yesterday, I was actually spent a couple hours out there in the rain with the umbrella, parked alongside the road and watched the traffic fly down in both directions. Walked the property, saw what was there. I was not pleased with what I saw. But at the same time, I have to look at it in another respect. This is a PRD, which completely changes everything within that entire development of Scenic Heights Ridge. In fact, I also see the same situation will shortly be occurring across the street. Directly across the street from this development, they've got I think it's 8 lots for sale. That's on the sign. So it's a concern that's there. Most of the properties are expansive. We also know that the county is pushing us in all kinds of directions so that they don't want us to expand our city boundaries. They want us to build within the city limits that we have now, or the urban growth area, and inside that, and not expand out. But at the same time, I'm looking at the design, and I think the design for the most part is pretty good, because there's a lot of people that don't want property maintenance. They want to come in, they want to drive and park in their garage, close the door, and go inside. You never come out unless they're going somewhere. I live in a PRD. I live in areas where there's 5,000 square foot lots, 7,200 square foot lots, and 10,000 square foot lots. I live in areas where they built, I think it was 6 homes with daylight basements that could be rented out separately. And it's allowed. The state is pushing us in those directions. We have to be aware of this. We also live in a situation now where the state is saying to cities and counties, your R1 zone, if I wanted to come in on my 10,000 square foot lot and bring in a tiny home, and I could put separate gas meter, electric, and water and sewer, the city can't tell me I can't. The state is overriding us in those respects. We see that on Pioneer Way, where they're going to build commercial and then residential in the commercial business district. We're being pushed in different directions that we don't have any control over. Do we like it? No, we don't. Can we work with it? We're trying to work within the system itself. In looking at the development, I've lived in townhomes where we've actually had the situation that has been expressed here before. 442 townhomes in a development, and over half of them had to be chance anchored because they were sinking. So we won a $55 million lawsuit against a developer, and all those problems were fixed. So I think when this was happening, a lot of this was going on and might be on the tips of your tongue or in your mindset that the problems are there. But I think the developers have learned, it's my understanding, the developers have learned, we got to be cautious because we're subject to a big lawsuit. So, but all those things in line, I agree with what I'm hearing my fellow commissioners say, but I don't see how we can't approve this. I mean, that's just my own thought process. I'm seeing smaller and narrower buildings in other cities. I think about this. I think about Seattle, the single-family houses that are now being bought up, and they're building multi-story apartment complexes with no on-site parking. Period. Use the existing street parking is what they're telling the people to do. I don't want that to happen to us. So when I see we've got 4.5 parking stalls per unit, that's probably a pretty good thing. On the other side of that coin, I've got a 20-foot driveway. But if I have a truck that's a long bed truck, it's 24 feet long. It won't fit in my driveway without obstructing the sidewalk. But they still make allowances for that. I'm not saying I agree with it, but I look at the development and I see what's happening around it. I look at the size of the properties that are around this, and generations are gonna move in. And those big lots that are there on Scenic Heights Ridge Road, even at the Y, are going to be subdivided. It's already happening. And so why not get the best product we can get? I don't know what the price is. I don't really care what the price is. My concern is, how does the property look and will it function? The code says 75 feet from a buildable structure to the bluff. We're getting that. We're getting a private street. We're getting a PRD. The HOA is going to be required to maintain everything that's in there. The city won't have any jurisdiction once it's built, once it, the developer starts. I think that's a positive. That takes the relief off of the city. So that's where I have to go with this, is based on that. It's not perfect, but I see a lot of other questionable buildings that are on that street as well. Should they be there or should they not be there? That's my preaching.
Okay. Thank you. Pat?
Nothing right now.
Al?
So I talked a lot about the sites themselves. I didn't talk much about the geology or environmental issues, which I also have some concerns with. I'm particularly concerned about feeling like not enough time, not enough opportunity has been provided to the Planning Commission to review some of these things. We received 177 pages of supplemental information yesterday afternoon. Today, this evening, while you were all sitting here, we got handed 5 additional pages, including something, as I'm just reading through it while somebody was talking, a statement that I don't understand the context for, maybe Mr. Bridges can address. The geoengineers estimated a lower end bluff retreat rate of 3 inches per year and a more aggressive bluff retreat rate of 6 to 12 inches, typically manifested as episodic slew events. And now I don't have any issues with the setbacks, but this information out of context worries me about approving something when I haven't had time to really look into it or ask the questions appropriately. And I don't know if Mr. Bridges wants to talk to this now, or if you're equipped to.
So I'd like to address the issue of timing, if I could, while Mr. Bridges is coming to the microphone. The supplemental materials that we sent to the commission yesterday, staff has responsibility for that, and we apologize for that. It was an inadvertent miss on our part to not have that in the original packet. Secondly, our desire to get the third-party review of the applicant's geotechnical report was driven solely so that we would be able to answer questions in this setting, because we knew that they were of a great interest to the community, to those residents, because it was brought to our attention on a number of occasions. The timing of that, as I said earlier, we received it unfortunately at 4:30 yesterday afternoon. Something that you hear me say time and time again in these proceedings is that if the Planning Commission believes you need additional time to continue to review the materials that you've been provided, that is within your discretion to say that you need that time, and you can certainly continue an application. So please know that you can have the time that you need to review the materials. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Mr. Bridges.
Thank you, Mr. Hovey. And I'm going to say something briefly, then I'm going to turn it over to the geotechnical engineer from Terra Associates, who would better be able to address your concerns. But I guess the takeaway from me on this report is our third-party review agreed with their 75-foot setback. It didn't raise a concern for him, this different sloughing rate being more accelerated. And the gentleman does have extensive knowledge of that area, helping the city put their pipe in the ground. So I'm going to turn it over to Caroline, if you don't mind, from Terra Associates. She is the expert in the field, so she can address your concern.
I'm Carolyn Decker. I'm with Terra Associates. We're the geotechnical engineers for this project. One thing I did want to start out saying, I spoke with Jay with Geoengineers, who's the author of the supplemental report that you received this evening. He and I had a long conversation yesterday about his findings and his conclusions versus my findings and my conclusions, and the bottom line at the end of the day was he agreed with our conclusions. Now, everyone is talking about a 75-foot setback. If you actually go through our geotechnical report and everything, it is 65. We have a 50-foot buffer with a 15-foot building setback. In our opinion, that was a minimum requirement necessary for public safety and the safety of the buildings. Now, as I understand, there's a 75-foot setback required by code. No one has an issue with it, so we're going to just roll with the 75-foot setback. In returns of bluff retreat rates, that is one of the most difficult things that we are asked to calculate from a geotechnical standpoint. There are many different methods of calculating it. The first one is the one that I prepared for in the original report, and it additionally spoke about in the supplemental report, which is called the RUSL. This is something that is used nationwide. It's something we have successfully used down in the Gig Harbor area for the bluffs on there, which are predominantly sand. In speaking with the engineer from GeoEngineers, he and I kind of had a difference of opinion of the best way to go about this. But at the end of the day, the bluff retreat rate doesn't really have a great impact on what we are proposing to do on this site. And the 75-foot setback gives us the necessary buffers to make this a safe project from both a public and private standpoint.
Can I?
Yes.
So you just said that your recommendation was 65 feet, but that you agree with 75 feet.
75, not a problem with 75.
On page 164 of the 177 supplemental, in a letter dated August 16th, 2019, the statement is, based on our site observations and subsurface explorations, we're recommending a 50-foot buffer with a 25-foot building setback for a total of 75 feet from the crest of the steep slope. So,
Oh, we did have it correct. Okay.
yeah. and
But
that's
the
for-
original geotech report had 65. So we had 65 and 75. We're going with 75.
That's from Terra Associates dated August 16th, 2019.
That is mine, yes.
Yes. Okay, so 75 feet.
75 feet.
Thank you.
Okay. Patty? Of course.
I wanted to make the distinction when we were talking.
I'm sorry, can I have you on the microphone, please?
Patty, yes.
Wanted to make the distinction when we're talking about runoff. There are two different sources of water that we're dealing with in this Conservancy Bluff area. One is the runoff from the uplands, what we're trying to collect in this culvert. The second source comes from these underground springs, which the Conservancy Bluff area is filled with. We all have a ripple effect in our lawns. It's these underground springs, and I don't know of a way to engineer collecting all of this water. So if an additional comment, I drag my garbage cans up to Scenic Heights Street, and the length of my driveway is about the same as the adjoining property. In the shoreline management plan, and I know that the city's getting ready to update this document, and I think the last time it was updated was 2013, there is a section in there that talks about the city periodically assessing and looking at these shoreline areas and taking note of where the sloughing, the erosion, the water runoff is occurring. And we've lived on Scenic Heights for 20 years, and I don't know of a time when the city tried to take a look at that and make note of it. So possibly when this next update comes, that will occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Steve?
Just if I could, that's an excellent segue to this is Mayor Cohen noted we are required to update our SMP 2021, if I remember correct, 2020. Yes, 2020. And the Department of Ecology has provided some grants to cities that are part of this update cycle. And we have proposed to the council, and the council seems to be in agreement that we're going to submit our grant application to the Department of Ecology. And our goal is to hire a consultant to specifically study the Bluff Conservancy area because of some of these topics which have been raised not only with this application but in prior years. And so we'll be looking at those things such as the sloughing and just sort of the conditions of the bluff with the eye towards updating our SMP to have the most up-to-date regulations and policies we could have in that particular area. So that's absolutely part of our plan of attack.
Could I suggest this project be held until that's completed?
Well, how would you?
Yeah,
you'd like more-
I'm not in a position to make a decision
Yeah,
tonight.
So I think, we would like to have at least one more meeting to,
So again, that's within the Planning Commission's purview, and so what it would take would be a motion and a second and a vote of the commission to continue the item to your next meeting.
I would like to make a motion that we continue this item for the next meeting, so that the planning commission can better be prepared for this.
yeah, the public, it's open. The public hearing is open, will stay open.
So I'd like to second that, but I know the applicant wants to make a comment.
Oh, of course.
No worries. I was just asking for clarification about whether the record was going to be open or whether it was going to close the hearing and then continue it. So you provided clarification. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the stays open. So I have a motion and a second, a modified motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, seeing that, the motion passes. We will continue October 22.
And you guys are invited to come down to our house to see our meltdown, because we're laying out in our house.
I'm not going to say anything. Yeah, I have the same thing everybody else has.